In the final years of the 20th century, Canada found itself in its most intense air combat operation since the Second World War. The situation in most of the former Yugoslavia had stabilized. Canadian helicopters had been providing support to peacekeepers on the ground for more than 6 years. But when the horrors of ethnic cleansing surfaced in Kosovo, the mission ramped up. 6 CF-18s from 3 Wing in Bagotville had deployed in theater to Italy. On March 24, 1999, just before midnight Adriatic time, 4 CF-18 Hornets launched from Aviano Air Base. En route to pre-planned targets in Kosovo, these tactical fighters were part of a larger NATO strike package. Over the next 78 days and nights, the 6, then 12, then 18 Canadian CF-18s in Aviano flew almost 700 combat sorties over roughly 2,600 flying hours. They delivered more than 500,000 pounds of high-explosive bombs on targets throughout Kosovo and areas in the former Yugoslavia, all without loss to Canadian aircrew and aircraft. Quite remarkable, considering they led over half of the non-US-led missions and flew a high percentage of high-risk missions. As part of a dramatic airlift, more than 5,000 Kosovar refugees were brought to Canada over a 3-month period. Air Force facilities and personnel helped with arrival screening and processing.
The level of professionalism when we embarked on the Kosovo operation was far higher than it was at the beginning of the First and Second World Wars, for instance. There were still limitations of resources. It was still difficult to keep up with technology. And it's remarkable that we were able to maintain that level of operations in Kosovo. It was a very significant effort that gave us a good reputation in the world's military.
Abroad, Canada's Air Force participated in a number of humanitarian relief missions, including a hurricane in Honduras and a devastating earthquake in Turkey. At home, Air Force personnel continued to assist with the aftermath of floods in the Saguenay, helped Ontario and Quebec to recover from the Great Ice Storm of 1998, and aided in the grim task of locating wreckage from the Swiss air disaster off the coast of Nova Scotia. The dawn of the 21st century broke with a fury. On September 11, 2001, terrorists hijacked commercial aircraft and flew them into New York's World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon in Washington. All civil aviation was immediately grounded over North America. With another hijacked plane still in the air and other potential threats, Canadian CF-18s went on alert. That fateful day, thousands of other Air Force personnel swung into action as aircraft diverted to Canadian airfields. Rerouted passengers and crew were generously hosted at CF facilities.
Beef and turkey and ham. And we've got pizza. You can have more than one.
The level of emergency preparedness of the Canadian forces increased almost overnight. The Disaster Assistance Response Team, or DART, ready to deploy from 8 Wing Trenton. Extra CF-18s were placed at strategic locations across the country.
September 11th, 2001, 9/11, put us all in shock. And to many it seemed that our experience of the past in warfare was all had. But in fact, these so-called turning points in military history make it more important than ever to understand the past.
Operation Apollo was Canada's military contribution to the campaign against terrorism. Its goal, to remove the Taliban from power in Afghanistan, destroy Al-Qaeda camps, and capture their leaders. Under Apollo, 437 Squadron deployed a strategic airlift detachment with an Airbus 310 from Trenton to Germany and later the Arabian Gulf. 2 long-range maritime patrol Auroras also deployed there, along with about 200 Air Force personnel from 14 Wing Greenwood and 19 Wing Comox. The Auroras and their crews kept a watchful eye on vessels operating in the Arabian Gulf, specifically any that might be carrying Al-Qaeda leaders. Sea King helicopters performed vital reconnaissance, transport, and escort functions from aboard Canadian ships in the region, extending their range and providing armed support to their boarding parties. Camp Mirage was set up in the Arabian Gulf region as the Canadian base of operations for support into Afghanistan. From Camp Mirage, the Hercules flew their resupply flights, and the Auroras flew their patrols. The main function of the camp was to support Canadians, but as a coalition resource, the Hercs would sometimes be called upon to support non-Canadian missions. Throughout this extraordinary time, Canada maintained its many, many commitments in international peacekeeping and peacemaking activities. The Air Force provided assistance in about a dozen situations. East Timor during its fight for independence from Indonesia. Haiti following the overthrow of the government. Helping to control airspace throughout the Balkans. And in support of UN sanctions against Iraq. True to form, Air Force personnel answered calls for help from around the world. It seemed there was an overabundance of natural disasters. Yet our personnel were there to provide desperately needed humanitarian relief. From earthquakes in El Salvador, to record-breaking hurricanes such as Katrina, which struck New Orleans. And of course, the massive tsunami which hit Sri Lanka and the Maldives on Boxing Day in 2004. At home, they helped fight forest fires in British Columbia and secured the skies above the G8 World Leaders Conference in Kananaskis, Alberta. Ongoing operations saw Griffins doing maintenance on microwave towers in the Arctic. Auroras patrolling the coastlines for potential drug runners, and enforcing the United Nations moratorium on drift net fishing.
Because we have always responded with such effect and such generosity, we have earned the utmost, or the final respect of being given heavy responsibilities without any hesitation from our senior allies.
A large part of that profile was due to the courage and devotion of search and rescue teams, widely recognized among the best in the world. SAR crews saved the lives of hundreds of people a year, often extracting them from dangerous and difficult situations. Their motto, "That others may live," says it all. By 2005, Much of the focus of Canada's international military operations had shifted from the Arabian Gulf to Afghanistan. As part of its contribution to the UN's International Security Assistance Force, or ISAF, Canada helped to fight the Taliban insurgency against the democratically elected government of Afghanistan and prevent acts of terrorism. Phase 1 began in the capital, Kabul. The Air Force found new technologies to meet its needs. Spurwar and other unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, were launched to gather intelligence on Taliban activities. Phase 2 saw the establishment of an ISAF regional command in the southern province of Kandahar. In Kandahar, Canadian Griffons and Chinooks provided support to the troops on the ground by flying in supplies and providing armed escorts. As the Millennium settled in, the problem of the Air Force's aging fleets began to be addressed. Significant aircraft acquisition programs provided optimism and the promise of greater operational capabilities. New aircraft came online. The Cormorant, which replaced the Labrador helicopters, the Globemaster, and Chinooks. Contracts were signed to acquire 17 J-model Hercules and 28 Cyclones to replace the Sea King helicopters. UAVs were leased for operations in Afghanistan. Both the Aurora and the CF-18 fleet were modernized. The Airbus acquired an air-to-air refueling capability. In an unpredictable world, it's difficult to say what the Canadian Air Force will look like in the future, what its role and purpose will be. But one thing is sure. The Air Force will continue to serve and protect Canadians, and its men and women will continue to demonstrate that unique Canadian approach to any task. It's an approach that gets the job done, anytime, anywhere, whether it's beside a gravel airstrip in the high Arctic, a broken runway in Central Africa, or in the thick of it in trouble spots around the world. It's all part of our country's tradition of service in military aviation. A tradition that goes back a century, that protects all Canadians, that helps victims of war and catastrophe, and goes like an arrow through the hearts of all who fly, and all who love the marvel of flight.